The hour is late, and the shadows grow restless. Welcome to Wicked Whispers, where the line between reality and nightmare fades. Tonight I will share 3 tales, unseen, untold, and unexplained. Each will pull you deeper into the unknown, testing your courage with every word. Before we begin, heed this warning. The stories may end, but their echoes will linger. Subscribe, if you dare, and prepare for the unsettling whispers yet to come. Now, let the darkness unfold. My sister didn't show up for the funeral. Honestly, I couldn't fault her for it. By the time Mom's life was nearing its end, things had spiraled into an unrelenting mess. I ended up taking a break from college, 1 full semester gone, to help Dad manage those grueling last months. That meant being back in the hometown I had spent years avoiding. The place felt hollow, like a shell of itself, weighed down by memories and secrets that were better left buried. We first noticed something was wrong with Mom during the summer. She had always been a singer, the kind of person who couldn't stand silence. If the house was quiet, she'd fill it with a song. Some of my earliest memories were of her at the kitchen sink, belting out that one ABBA song. Mamma mia, here I go again, my, how can I resist you? That summer, I was home from school, doing everything I could to avoid running into anyone I knew from the past. I stayed out of town and kept to myself. One morning, I was sitting at the kitchen table, pretending to focus on a book, while Mom stood at the stove flipping pancakes. She was humming that same old tune, her usual. But then, without warning, she stopped. Mamma mia, here I go again. Hi, no. At first, I didn't think much of it. I was too engrossed in a book for next semester, trying to get a jump start on the reading list. Hi, there I go again. No, bye-bye. It wasn't until the sharp, acrid smell of burning batter filled the air that I finally looked up. The memory stings, as vivid now as it was then. Mom standing at the stove, spatula in hand, her face knotted in a look of pure confusion. She wasn't just distracted, she was lost. Her eyes darted back and forth between the blackened pancakes and the pan, as if trying to solve a puzzle she couldn't quite piece together. Hi, bye-bye, Mamma mia. Dad and I thought it was a stroke. That made sense. A sudden glitch in the brain, something a doctor could explain, fix even. We rushed her to the hospital, hearts pounding, clinging to the hope that whatever it was, it could be undone. Hours of waiting, tests, and quiet dread later, the doctor came in with the truth. It wasn't a stroke. It was early onset dementia. Those words hit like a thunderclap. Early onset dementia. My mother, the vibrant, singing, humming, larger-than-life woman who seemed invincible, was slipping away. Not all at once, but slowly, piece by piece. For a while, I tried to convince myself it wasn't that bad. She still had good days. Days where she'd hum her favorite songs while folding laundry, or laugh at a joke Dad told at dinner. But those moments grew fewer, the cracks in her memory widening with each passing week. Some days, she'd forget where she was or why she walked into a room. Other days, she'd look at me with a blankness that made my chest ache. It was a cruel reversal. Mom had always been the one who knew how to fix things. She could patch up scraped knees, calm fevers, and soothe tears with a single hug. Now, it was my turn to care for her. But how do you bandage something you can't see? How do you heal a mind that's unraveling? The truth is you can't. All you can do is be there, trying to catch the pieces as they fall, hoping you can hold on to what's left. In the beginning, my sister was there. Those were the easier days, when Mom still had glimmers of clarity. Sometimes she'd sing, and for a few precious moments the words would come out right. Those moments were the worst, in a way. They gave us hope. Hope that maybe, somehow, she'd find her way back from the haze. But the haze always thickened. Mom's sleep patterns unraveled first. Nights became restless, her body tired, but her mind stuck in an endless loop. We'd guide her to bed, prop her up with pillows, and leave the television on as a distraction. Dad, ever resourceful, drove to what must have been the last surviving Radio Shack in the country. He bought a set of walkie-talkies, one for Mom, one for him and me, and one for my sister. Mom's had the talk button taped down, so any sound, any murmur would come through to us. It was our lifeline, our security net. Dad and I set up camp in the living room, the radio crackling softly between us as we tried to sleep. My sister stayed in her old bedroom, her walkie-talkie on the nightstand. Most nights, the only thing we'd hear from Mom's room was the faint sound of her muttering to herself. Sometimes she'd hum. "Mamma mia, hi hi," she'd whisper, the words trailing off into the static. But then came the night of the screaming. It jolted us awake, the radio erupting with sharp, terrified cries. Dad and I scrambled to turn on every light in the house, rushing to her room. My sister followed, her face pale, her hands shaking as we surrounded Mom. She was sitting upright, her eyes wild and distant, her voice cracking as she screamed. We tried to soothe her, our words tumbling over each other. "It's okay, Mom. It was just a bad dream. You're safe. Everything's fine." But she wasn't fine, and we weren't either. That night broke something in my sister. By morning, she was gone. She packed a bag and left without saying much, just a quiet, "I can't do this," as she walked out the door. I didn't blame her. I wanted to leave too. That night, Mom grabbed my sister's arm, her fingers trembling, her voice breaking into sobs. "It's taking everything from me," she cried. The desperation in her voice froze us both, but my sister reacted first. She yanked her arm free, leaving a pale, white imprint of Mom's grip on her forearm. The next morning, her bags were packed, waiting by the door. I was furious. How could she abandon us? How could she leave me and Dad to face this alone? And most of all, how could she leave Mom? I chased her out to the car, my voice cracking as I shouted at her. She paused, her hand on the car door, and turned to me. Her hand was so cold, she said quietly, her eyes distant before getting in and driving away. After that, everything unraveled. Mom couldn't manage the simplest tasks: eating, using the bathroom, brushing her hair. It wasn't long before she started forgetting who we were. The first time she looked at me with blank, unrecognizing eyes, I thought my chest might cave in. But we pressed on. You had to. You just did. For her. Even in her worst days, she tried to sing. The words didn't come out right anymore. They tangled on her tongue or drifted into nonsense. "It's taking my words," she said one day, her voice quivering. "It's taking them. It wants them for itself." I thought she was just talking about the dementia. What else could she mean? But after she passed, I began to wonder. The day after the funeral, the house was suffocatingly quiet. It was just me and Dad, surrounded by mountains of food dropped off by well-meaning family and neighbors. Pies, casseroles, loaves of bread, enough to feed a small army. "The fuck are we supposed to do with all this?" Dad muttered, poking at a half-eaten cobbler. I didn't know. I didn't have any answers left. I felt hollow, like someone had scooped out my insides and left me with nothing but the memory of all the questions I couldn't answer. We stayed in the living room. It hurt too much to be anywhere else in the house. Every room bore her touch. Pictures she'd hung, knickknacks she'd placed just so, colors she'd chosen. Her absence screamed at us from every corner. So, we huddled in the living room, eating cobbler in silence, the TV murmuring softly in the background. The radio was still there, sitting on the end table, its silent presence heavier than it had any right to be. I woke up in the middle of the night, my neck stiff and aching from falling asleep upright on the couch. For a moment, I couldn't tell where I was. The flickering light from the television was the only thing breaking the darkness, casting strange shadows across the room. As my eyes adjusted, I glanced over at Dad. He was sitting on the other couch, his posture rigid and unmoving. I couldn't tell if his eyes were open or shut. I sat there, still groggy, waiting for one of those brighter flashes from the TV to light up the room enough for me to see. When it finally did, I saw his eyes, open, staring straight ahead. "Dad," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet. His head snapped toward me and he brought a finger to his lips, motioning for silence. He didn't make a sound, but the message was clear. "Shh." I froze, unsure what was happening. I looked back at the TV, thinking maybe he just wanted to hear something in the show. But then I noticed his hand on the remote, lowering the volume until the sound was almost gone. That's when I heard it too. The walkie-talkie on the end table glowed faintly, the soft crackle of static breaking through the silence. My chest tightened as I stared at it. The light pulsed intermittently, like it was picking up something from Mom's old bedroom. At first I thought it was just interference, some meaningless feedback. I was about to get up and switch it off when the sound came through. "Mamma mia, bye-bye, mamma mia, bye-bye, bye-bye, bye-bye." The voice was faint, almost a whisper, like it was drifting in from another room or another world. For a moment, I thought I'd imagined it, my ears playing tricks on me in the stillness of the night. But when I turned to Dad, the look on his face told me everything. He'd heard it too. We sat there, unmoving, bathed in the dim, flickering light of the TV, watching that little radio glow as the voice repeated its eerie refrain. "Mamma mia, bye-bye." Dad got up first, moving silently toward the hallway that led to Mom's bedroom. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. He was really going in there. A part of me wanted to scream at him to stop, but another part, the bigger part, wanted to get up and leave. I wanted to grab my keys, walk out the door, and drive back to my old life. Back to college, back to before. But instead, I found myself rising from the couch, like I was moving through a dream. My legs felt heavy, my stomach a hollow pit, but I followed him. The hallway was lined with family photos, bright smiles, laughing faces, eyes full of life. They all seemed to watch us now, their cheer mocking the dread that thickened with every step we took. The closer we got to Mom's door, the louder the sound became. "Mamma mia, bye-bye." Dad put his hand on the doorknob. He hesitated for the briefest moment before twisting it and pushing the door open. I stayed close behind him, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. And there she was. She was spinning around the room, bathed in the cold glow of moonlight spilling through the window. Her burial dress lay discarded in a filthy heap in the corner, covered in dirt and dried mud. She changed into one of her old nightgowns, the fabric swaying with her movements as she twirled and hummed. "Mamma mia, bye-bye," she sang softly, almost serenely. For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, this wasn't real, that it couldn't be real. Dad stepped into the room, his voice trembling as he started to say, "Hun," but he didn't get the chance. The thing stopped mid-spin. Its head snapped toward us, and in an instant it lunged. The movement was so fast, so wrong. It didn't even look human anymore the way it turned on its heels. Its eyes weren't aligned, pointing in different directions like a broken doll's. And before I could even react, it was on Dad, slamming him to the ground with unnatural force. His shoulder hit me on the way down, knocking me back and splitting my lip. Dazed, I scrambled to my elbows, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The thing that looked like Mom straddled Dad, its hands locked around his throat. He clawed at her face, his fingers digging deep, one thumb hooking into her nostril, the other plunging into her eye socket. But it didn't stop. The sound of his choking filled the room, wet and desperate. His eyes locked on mine, pleading silently. I pushed myself to my feet, trembling, and did the only thing I could think of. I kicked her, hard. My foot connected with her face, and I felt her nose crunch under the blow. Pain shot through my toes like I'd slammed them into a steel corner, but it worked. She flew back, landing on the floor with a sickening thud, her grip loosening from Dad's throat. He gasped, coughing violently as I stood there, panting and staring at the thing that used to be my mother. The thing that wore my mother's face landed on its back in the bedroom, limbs sprawled at unnatural angles. I limped over to my dad, grabbing his arm to help him off the floor. Every part of me wanted to drag him out of the house, to leave whatever horror this was behind us. But he didn't move toward the door. Instead, he stared into the room, his breath ragged, and muttered, "I need to see." "See what?" I hissed. But he was already stepping forward. I followed him, my pulse thundering in my ears. The thing lay in a heap, twitching, its shape shifting and bubbling beneath the nightgown. Its skin began to blister and pop like boiling water, fissures opening up across its surface. The bones beneath collapsed inward, crumbling like dried leaves. It fizzled and sizzled, melting into the carpet in a sticky, steaming puddle. And then it was gone. The air smelled like burnt sugar and rot. I gagged, gripping the doorframe for support, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. Dad stood there, silent, staring at the empty space where it had been. Finally, he turned to me. "We can't stay here." We packed quickly, grabbing a few changes of clothes and some of the platters of food from the kitchen. We left without looking back, checking into a cheap motel a few blocks away. Neither of us slept. We lay in the twin beds, the dim blue glow of late-night infomercials flickering across the room. The air was heavy with unspoken words. I wanted to ask him what the hell we'd just seen, but I didn't think he had the answer. When the sun finally rose, the silence broke. "Pass me the remote," Dad said, his voice rough. He got up to shower, and I tried to stomach a few bites of the food we'd brought with us. I thought about calling my sister, but I stopped myself. What could she do? She'd been smart enough to leave when she had the chance. Around 2 p.m., exhaustion finally caught up with me, and I drifted off. When I woke up, the room was dark. The blinds were drawn tight, and the clock on the bedside table read 9:12 p.m. Dad was sitting at the small table by the window. The lamp above him cast long, eerie shadows across his face. He wasn't alone. The radio from Mom's bedroom sat on the table in front of him, its dim light glowing in the dark. It was singing again. "Mamma Mia, bye 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 bye." The sound was faint, distorted, but unmistakable. My blood ran cold. Dad looked up at me, his expression grim. "We have to go back." "No," I said, the word sharper than I intended. "We're not going back there." "I can't leave it like this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's still there." "That's not her," I snapped. But I could see the determination in his face, the same stubborn resolve he always had when his mind was made up. He was going back, whether I liked it or not, and I couldn't let him go alone. The voice on the radio kept singing, over and over, the same haunting refrain. "Mamma Mia, bye-bye." It sounded like it was mocking us. I've always heard people talk about how we're on the verge of a utopian future, a golden age of progress and enlightenment. As much as I wanted to believe that, I couldn't ignore the things happening in the world. It felt like we were heading toward anything but a utopia. But then, one day, I saw the future with my own eyes. It all started with something so ordinary. I could have missed it altogether. It was an old magazine I found tucked between some dog-eared paperbacks at a secondhand bookstore. The cover screamed at me. Curiosities and Anomalies, printed in bold lime green letters, with October '97 in smaller print underneath. There, staring back at me, was a peculiar alien creature, its eyes wide and unblinking. I flipped through the pages, intrigued. Where did this come from? I thought. I hadn't seen the cashier slip it into my bag, and for something that was supposed to be over 20 years old, the condition was pristine. I shrugged, briefly glanced at it again, then tossed it onto the coffee table. Life went on. Later that evening, stuck in a relentless boredom, I flipped through the TV channels, hoping something would catch my eye. But after a while, I turned it off. Nothing was worth watching. My eyes wandered to the magazine, its green lettering glowing in the dim room. Why not see what was happening in '97? I thought, picking it up again. What followed was an hour of deep diving into the strange, quirky world of paranormal oddities. There were plenty of bizarre articles, UFO sightings, ghost hunters, conspiracy theories, and one particularly intriguing story about a woman's alleged intimate encounter with an alien. I chuckled to myself, probably the alien on the cover, as I skimmed through the pages. At the back of the magazine, I found a classified section, offering a strange assortment of products and services. Voodoo dolls, psychic readings, alien artifacts. And then, there it was. A simple ad, almost hidden amongst the rest, that read, "Time travel for $30, limited offer, call now." The offer seemed too absurd to be real, but then again, nothing about this magazine or the strange evening felt particularly real. Something about that ad tugged at me. A time travel device. For $30. I stared at the text longer than I should have. I didn't call, not yet, but it stayed with me. What if? What if it wasn't a joke? What if I could really travel through time? I didn't know it then, but that one odd encounter with a magazine from the past would change everything I knew about time, fate, and the future I had been so skeptical of. Clutching the TTD, I shuffled over to my desk and powered up my computer. There was no reason not to catch up on what was happening in the world. I opened my favorite news website and started scrolling. But even though this was my first time visiting the site that day, everything seemed eerily familiar. An overwhelming sense of déjà vu washed over me as I scanned the headlines. Then my eyes locked onto the TTD on my desk. "No way," I muttered under my breath. "It can't be." I scrolled to the top of the page and checked the date. My heart stopped for a moment. The date was the 5th of the month, not the 8th like it should have been. My hand trembled as I reached for the TTD. With a quick press of the recall button, nothing happened. No sounds, no flashes. But when I looked back at my screen, the computer had powered off. I turned it back on, and as the screen flickered to life, the headlines had changed. The date now read the 8th. I had just traveled through time. I sat back, eyes wide, on the edge of my couch, staring down at the TTD on the coffee table like it might explode. What had just happened? This was impossible. The device I had bought out of some old, forgotten magazine, something I had dismissed as a joke, this was real, and I had just used it. Still in shock, I grabbed the TTD and stepped out of the apartment. There was a park just down the street, and I had to know for sure whether this device was legitimate. I needed to test it. I wandered through the park until I found a medium-sized pecan tree. I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture of it. Then, taking the TTD from my belt, I set it to travel back 5 years and pressed start. The shift was so subtle, so quick, I almost didn't realize it happened. One moment, the tree looked a certain way. Then in the blink of an eye, it was smaller, younger. I snapped another picture, barely able to believe my eyes. I hit recall, and instantly, the tree grew back, returning to its current size. I couldn't believe it. I had just experienced time travel in a way I could never have imagined. With the TTD in hand, I walked back to my apartment, knowing that my life would never be the same. I downloaded both pictures to my computer and opened them side by side. At first glance, they seemed like nothing more than two images of the same tree taken years apart. But when I looked at the timestamps, something clicked. Those photos had been taken less than a minute apart. That was the confirmation I needed. The TTD was real. As I stared at the screen, the weight of the device's power started to settle in. I could change so much. Correct all the mistakes I'd made. Fix things that had gone wrong. Even make a fortune. The possibilities were endless. But deep down, I knew that wasn't why I had the TTD. My parents had taught me better than that. Using it for selfish gain would be wrong, no matter how tempting. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was a reason I had come across the device. In the end, I decided that the best way to use it was not to use it at all. But before I could let go of it for good, there was one thing I had to do. I had to see the future. I grabbed the TTD, took a deep breath, and headed out the door. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I needed to understand what was coming, if we were headed in the right direction or not. The device in my hand was the only way to find out. I went back to the park, the place that had become my test ground. This time I was planning to jump 10 years into the future. There was no telling what could change in that time. I figured it would be safest to travel somewhere familiar. The park, with its wide open spaces, seemed as good a place as any. I stood there for a moment, taking in the quiet surroundings. I set the TTD for today's date, 10 years ahead, and pressed start. In an instant, the scene around me shattered. The park's lush green beauty disappeared, replaced by a desolate wasteland. The trees were scorched, the ground cracked and dry. The once vibrant landscape had turned into a barren, lifeless expanse, surrounded by the ruins of what looked like a burned-out city. My stomach dropped as I looked around in stunned silence. I made my way to where the park's entrance used to be, now nothing more than a broken, charred gate. When I stepped onto the street, the full weight of the devastation hit me. The roads were littered with wrecked, abandoned cars. Everywhere I looked, there were twisted metal frames, rusted and forgotten. But what made my blood run cold were the bodies, rotted corpses hanging from inverted metal crosses. The air was thick with an unsettling stench of decay and death. Satanic symbols were spray-painted everywhere, like the remnants of some apocalyptic cult. And worst of all, the silence of the ruined city was shattered by the distant, agonized screams of people. Screams that echoed through the desolation like a terrible symphony. I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. "What happened here?" I whispered to myself, as I took in the horror that had become the world. My hand trembled, gripping the TTD. I had wanted to see the future. But this wasn't what I had imagined. I was still reeling from the horrors I had just witnessed. As I stumbled through the devastated city, trying to make sense of it all, my eyes caught movement ahead. Coming around a corner, I saw a group of about 8 people. They were shackled together, their bodies battered and bloodied. The flesh on their torsos had been ripped open, the gashes deep and gruesome, a horrific testament to the violence they had endured. They were being herded by 2 monstrous, demonic creatures, towering figures with glowing red eyes and blackened, twisted horns. These creatures grinned, their teeth sharp and unnervingly human. The sight was enough to make my stomach churn. The scene before me was too much to process. too much to bear. I felt my breath quicken as panic set in. There was no way I could stick around to see more of this nightmare. I turned and ran, stumbling back the way I came, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to escape. I had to leave this nightmare behind. When I finally reached the park, my legs gave out from under me. I collapsed to the ground and bent over, retching violently. The world spun around me, and the images I had just seen replayed over and over in my mind. I couldn't erase them. I couldn't unsee them. Once the sickness passed, I fumbled for the TTD at my waist. My hands shook as I pressed the recall button, praying for the comfort of normalcy to return. A soft hum filled the air, and as I stood up, I noticed the familiar, peaceful park around me once again. The trees were green, the sky was blue, and the only sound was the gentle rustling of leaves. It was as though nothing had changed. I took a deep breath and let out a shaky sigh, grateful that the horrors were no longer in front of me. But despite the return to normalcy, a heavy, suffocating weight settled on me. The world I had glimpsed was now etched in my mind forever. Images of destruction, torment, and endless suffering. I couldn't escape the knowledge of what might come. The despair of knowing the future and feeling powerless to stop it was crushing. Back at my apartment, I took the TTD off my belt and stared at it, as if it held all the answers I needed, or maybe all the blame. I examined it for a long while, considering the temptation to use it again. But after what I'd seen, I knew I couldn't. I opened the back and removed the batteries, feeling a strange sense of finality as I held them in my palm. I crushed the device underfoot, watching as the screen shattered and the pieces scattered across the floor. I wanted to forget everything. The future, the visions, the pain. It wasn't the device's fault, I knew that. But I couldn't bear to keep it around anymore. It had shown me too much, and now the weight of that knowledge would haunt me forever. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen. The future, the inevitable destruction. I wished I could believe that we could change things, that we could band together and stop the world from descending into chaos. But based on everything happening now, I knew that we were powerless to prevent what was coming. All I can do now is share this with you. Maybe knowing will help you prepare, even if there's no way to stop it. Perhaps it's already too late. At least you won't be caught completely off guard. I'd always been told not to look out a window at night, that something strange might be watching you. It was one of those old wives' tales, or whatever, the kind of superstitions people tell to spook you. I didn't buy into that nonsense. I figured I was smarter than some creepy bedtime story passed down over generations. So naturally, I made a habit of doing the exact opposite. Like most people, I was eager to challenge the old rules, especially ones that seemed so outdated. I mean, who actually believes in things like ghosts, demons, or even the idea of someone watching through a window at night? In my neighborhood, that was the least of my concerns. One night, I woke up to answer nature's call, as one does. After finishing up and washing my hands, I noticed the mild thirst creeping up on me. So, I wandered into the kitchen, opened the fridge, and grabbed a glass. The cucumber lime water I kept chilled inside was exactly what I needed. Not a fan of plain tap water, you know? Drink in hand, I was just about to head back to bed when my gaze drifted toward the kitchen window. Might as well see what's out there, I thought, walking over to it without a second thought. I looked out. Nothing. Same as always. Dark streets, empty sidewalks, a quiet neighborhood. But then, as I turned away, an urge to take another glance washed over me. That was when I saw it. A face, pale and twisted, grinning at me from the darkness. At first I thought it was some weird reflection, but no, it was there, staring at me with an unnerving, unnatural smile that stretched impossibly wide, filled with jagged, sharp teeth. And that was the moment I realized some things are better left unseen. I screamed and bolted back to my room, slamming the door behind me. My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear my own thoughts. I jumped into bed, yanked the covers over my head, and tried to block it all out. What the hell was that? I whispered to myself, my mind racing with confusion and fear. I desperately tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, a weird, tired hallucination. But deep down, I couldn't shake the image of that smiling face, that twisted grin. It took a long time, but I eventually fell asleep, though I woke up several times throughout the night, convinced I could still feel eyes watching me. The next morning, my parents asked me why I had screamed the night before. I didn't want to admit what I had seen, so I brushed it off with a half-hearted excuse about a bad dream and my reflection scaring me. They seemed satisfied, probably chalking it up to my stress with college, and the conversation moved on. But I was still haunted by the image. I convinced myself it had been a figment of my imagination. It was the middle of the night. I was exhausted. My mind was playing tricks. That night, I stayed up late, cramming for an upcoming exam. Hours passed, and soon, I felt the familiar pangs of hunger. I remembered the hummus and artisan crackers in the kitchen, just the thing to fuel my study session. I grabbed the snack and headed back toward my room, my mind distracted by coursework. But as I passed the window, I hesitated. I didn't want to look, but I refused to let the superstition control me. It's 2020, for God's sake. I was in college, an adult. I wasn't some frightened child afraid of looking out a window at night. I approached the window and, with a deep breath, glanced outside. Nothing. Just the quiet, dark yard bathed in the soft glow of a streetlight. See? I told myself, a little smug. Superstition is just a bunch of crap. I started to turn away, but something stopped me. A strange pull. Maybe it was just the curiosity that lingered. Maybe it was something more. I turned back around. And there it was again. That face. The same twisted, pale smile stretched impossibly wide, the jagged teeth glistening under the streetlight's glow. My stomach dropped. I froze, unable to scream, unable to move. I dropped the hummus and crackers, the container clattering to the floor, but I couldn't make a sound. The thing on the other side of the window raised its pale, thin hand and wagged a long finger at me, as if scolding me, a mockery of a mother's chastising gesture. My blood ran cold, and then just like before, it smiled wider. I fled to my room, and as I entered, I saw the blinds on my 2 windows were open. The thing's face stared at me from both of them, and I ran back into the hall. I went into the bathroom and slammed the door behind me. I slumped down on the toilet with my head in my hands and begged for the thing to please go away. I heard a tap above me, and when I looked up at the small bathroom window, the face was there too. It still smiled while it shook its head. It wasn't going to stop, apparently. Hopelessly, I stood up, stepped into the shower, and pulled the curtain closed. I stayed there for the remainder of the night, but I didn't sleep. The next morning, my parents found me in the bathroom. I tried hysterically to tell them what had happened, but they only looked at me like I was crazy. And after I tried to cover all of the windows in the house, they brought me to the hospital. I've been hospitalized for a month now, and it's really not that bad. The doctors made sure I got a room without any windows, which has really helped my mental state, and things have been going so well that a few days ago, I got my cell phone back. With all this time on my hands, I've been thinking about the circumstances that led me to this point, and I've decided that maybe I was wrong about old wives' tales and superstitions. In fact, I urge anyone reading this not to blow off the old ways. They exist for a reason. That being said, there's another saying I've heard that I can't help but be concerned about, especially considering I have a mirror in my room. It's the one about the eyes being the windows to the soul.